Well, do not adjust your TV screens. This is not Congressman LaTourette joining us. It's kind of a vague facsimile of
beard,
it's
glasses.
the beard. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like having him here. Instead of Congressman LaTourette joining us this week, he's actually off on the West Coast. We're joined by my colleague Matt Hankin. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's jump right into things. There's been a lot of talk about tax reform over the last year or so, and it finally appears that comprehensive tax reform, at least in this current Congress, is dead. So attention is now turning to the question of tax extenders. Talk to us a little bit about those and what the prospects are.
Sure. The tax extenders, there's about 55 expiring provisions that at the end of 2013 expired, and so a lot of industries, a lot of individual tax credits. So obviously, there's a lot at stake. It's about $60 billion a year. And so a lot of American companies and individuals are looking to retroactively extend those. And with Chairman Camp of the Ways and Means Committee coming out with his overall tax reform a couple weeks ago, he's holding on to the prospect that he can pass his reform. And so he's not really looking to extenders as much as in the Senate, where new Chairman Ron Wyden of the Senate Finance Committee is looking at maybe in the next couple of weeks holding some hearings and then doing a markup down the road. He's probably not going to extend all 55 of the provisions. Some of the energy, particularly fossil fuel related provisions, he's considering letting expire. But fortunately for him, he doesn't have to pay for every single one of them. A lot of those are credits that affect middle-class Americans, like the state and local tax deduction, which is about $49 billion a year, so really hits the pocketbooks of a lot of Americans. But a lot of companies as well, standard things that really help them build for the future, like the research and development credit, which is about $5 billion a year, and a lot of companies are doing really innovative stuff using that tax deduction. So you close that, you really are starting to hurt long-term ability for companies to grow.
So with all of these provisions having expired and attention finally turning to whether or not to extend some of them, if you're a company that's interested in this, now would probably be a good time to reach out to some folks and say, hey, by the way, here's one of the extenders that we care about.
We'd be glad to put you in touch with the people that you need to talk to.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Second issue I want to talk to you about is unemployment insurance. Another issue, kind of like Groundhog's Day, I feel like we've been talking about it nonstop for the last few months. They finally reached a deal in the Senate, and this was a much ballyhooed deal that finally it looked like they were going to get sufficient number of Republican votes to pass the unemployment insurance extension. But that doesn't mean that it's a done deal. Now got to look at the House, and we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about the prospects for unemployment insurance in the House. Is there any prospects for unemployment insurance extension in the House?
I don't believe that they're great. The chances are not good. Mostly because, first of all, we still have to wait for the Senate, which is that they have to come back from recess and have a vote, and it's probably going to be a very close vote. So even though it was a bipartisan agreement, they're still just barely eking it out. And that wouldn't be the first time that bipartisan agreement from the Senate has fallen on deaf ears in the House. But the real reason why I don't think it's going anywhere in the House is that there really hasn't been an uproar. There's a lot of news about it, but you don't see at the grassroots level people reaching out to their congressman, particularly going to Republican congressmen, saying, Congressman, I really need this. This is my life. This is my family. You don't see that as much. You really see a lot more inside the Beltway discussion than outside the Beltway.
Well, there's been a lot of talk recently about Russia and Ukraine. I thought an interesting angle that was talked about recently was the possibility that the conflict in Ukraine could actually have an impact on the U.S. energy market in the sense that it could lead to renewed interest over the question of fracking. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe kind of explain just in layman's terms what fracking is?
Sure. Well, I'm from Colorado, so a very big fracking state. And it's basically you drill down and you have this expanding pipe. You drill really deep down into layers of the earth, and then you have an expanding pipe that basically breaks up oil, natural gas-bearing materials far down. And when it expands, it breaks open and allows the escape of that natural gas up through the pipe and back, and it's collected. And And so that's fracking. And yeah, it does, what's going on right now in the Ukraine, in Crimea, and Russia, a lot of energy dynamics going on, particularly with regard to natural gas. Russia is the world's largest natural gas exporter. The United States is the third largest natural gas importer. So you could see certainly that at some point down the road you might run into some real conflicts. But I think that right now we're just seeing the opening salvos of what the sanctions look like. Right now, really all it is you know, visa ban and freezing of assets for only about a dozen leaders from Russia and Ukraine, like former President Yanukovych. So that's really just the first step, and then if you ever get to energy sanctions, that's really the silver bullet that would have the most impact, but it also would really impact the U.S. sector as well. So at this point, you know, I don't think the U.S. would be prepared to play that card right now, knowing that you know, it would really hurt our economy as well. But what I would look at is that Russia has cut off a lot of energy supply to Ukraine. And so a lot of individuals in Congress are asking for the administration to help get natural gas and other energy supply to Ukraine. One of the problems we find is that the Ukraine actually doesn't have terminals to receive liquefied natural gas, and similarly the U.S. actually doesn't have terminals on the Atlantic coast to send it there. And so you'd really building a liquefied natural gas terminal is a pretty big prospect. You can't just build one in a few months like a 7-Eleven or something. So you know, it definitely could come to that. But in the meantime, you do see a lot of companies in the natural gas field. U.S. natural gas companies do have their stocks have been up over the past couple of months since what's gone on in Ukraine. And we'll be following that. Generally, right now, the markets are keeping their powder dry. They aren't sure if we're ever going to get to energy sanctions at this point.
Well, short of energy sanctions, can you see it as a kind of opportunity for supporters of fracking to kind of change the dynamic in this debate, which has been pretty, you know, it's been a pretty stagnant debate for a while here between the proponents of fracking and then the environmentalist opponents of it. Now suddenly being able to talk about fracking as part of some sort of national security component of foreign policy, which obviously would change the debate dramatically.
I think that's definitely the case. I think natural gas is viewed as sort of the bridge that will get to renewable energy, you know, in the coming decades. But a lot of environmentalists still have real problems with it. But I think right now you see that people that maybe were on the fence are starting to really say natural gas is a way to help some of our allies who, like Ukraine, who are right now facing the prospect of, you know, Russia strangling off its energy supply, and what can happen with that. And so yes, it could apply to Ukraine, it could apply to a lot of other allies throughout the European Union, because as soon as we cross that line of any sort of energy sanctions, it's going to not just apply to Ukraine and Russia, it's going to affect the entire European community. So, so yeah, we're already starting to see natural gas as being a friendly gesture to tighten our bonds with our allies over this issue.
Final issue I want to talk to you about. You mentioned you're from Colorado.
That's right.
Had a big development recently that obviously almost all the attention in November is going to be on whether or not Republicans can retake the Senate. It had been looking good for Republicans, and things got a little better when a race that didn't really seem to be on the radar screen, the Colorado Senate race, got a boost when Representative Cory Gardner got into the race. Tell us a little bit about that, the dynamics of that race, and where do you think you see this going at the end?
Sure. So it's you know, sitting Senator Mark Udall, and he was elected in 2008, and then you know, all this talk about Republicans taking over the Senate, they really had to put Colorado in play. It's too much of a purple state to not have that in play. And even though they had a number of Republican nominees, none of them were really their A-listers.
Yeah, so, I wouldn't call Ken Buck A-list.
We can give him another letter, but yeah. So they had, you know, Republicans really had to put Colorado in play, and they did by getting Cory Gardner to enter the race after he originally said he would not do so. And you know, he's a very good candidate. He's young, he's energetic, he's smart, and he gets along well with people. But so is Mark Udall. He's done a very good job in the U.S. Senate so far. And so when it comes down to it, I think, you know, Representative Gardner is really trying to make it about a national issue. He wants to make it about Barack Obama. He wants to make it about Obamacare. And I think that Mark Udall is trying to make it as local as possible, talk about the things that he's done for Colorado, and within Colorado, talking about specific regions, going into Republican territory like Colorado Springs and talking about what he's done for the military, going into you know, energy, a number of fields where he's really done a lot. So you're going to see a real contrast, one running a national campaign more so, and one running a local campaign. And so, but I think it's going to come down to a lot of, you know, field, which is actually getting people on the ground out to vote on Election Day, and it's going to be a very close contest. Full disclosure, I used to work for Senator Udall, so I've got a dog in that fight. I'd like to see him win. I think it's going to be very close, but I do think that Senator Udall has a few advantages, and but then again, so does Representative Gardner.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. You did a very good job sitting in for Congressman LaTourette, and we certainly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.